Hey guys, Al here. In this video, I had gotten invited to the great state of West Virginia to do a presentation on all things soil, and I also touch on some deer density and management strategies we've used on our farm. I hope you all tune in and enjoy this video, and please like, subscribe, and check us out at vitalizeseed.com. This company, I've been managing my family farm, which is about 400 acres in Noble County. Our primary focus there is timber and also wildlife management. And one of the limiting factors in southeastern Ohio is green food spaces. So we had a lot of clear cutting done in our neighborhood, but every time I went to plant a food plot, it just seemed like it wasn't enough acreage. And every time I had a new piece of property that I could plant a food plot on, I felt like I needed to get more out of it. And that's really what drove my passion into soil health. And I'm going to talk about how that not just works for food plots, but even lawns and gardens. And we've actually grown the last 5 years. We've been working with row crop farmers as far as Missouri and Iowa. And obviously we do a lot in Ohio, West Virginia, and the surrounding states as well. So if I could get this thing to work, we're really going to be in business. All right. So real quick on me, I'm not going to talk too much about Vitalize. If anybody's interested at the end, I'd be more than happy to talk to you. You can look at our website. But I do want to highlight a couple things that we did and why we did it differently. So one, I started trial and error just like most people. I had a tiller, I had a 40 horsepower tractor, and I wanted to start adding more food to the farm every time I had a chance. What ended up happening is I started to realize that I got a fertilizer bill to do, 5 or 6 acres of food plots for deer, and it was like going to be $2,000. I said, I'm not going to stay married if that's the case, so we have to figure something else out here. So I started looking at other resources. How can I make biology go to work for me? And if I'm going to put nutrients down, or spend money on lime, or spend money on triple 13, what do I need to do to get the most out of those? I started writing a blog actually on the old QDMA forums, so that goes back a while if anybody remembers those, but there was quite a bit of interest. People started asking me when QDMA forums went away. I was sharing a lot on Facebook. People started saying, man, I'd really buy a diverse mix like that for you. My partner actually had a pretty popular podcast. It's called the Habitat Podcast, which is pretty much for anybody that's interested in deer or wildlife habitat. He owned that podcast, and I said, would you ever consider working together on a seed company? Because you really got to get the marketing out there to have anybody care. So he said, sure. So I've been very passionate about soil health for about the last decade. I grow a huge tomato garden every year. I actually grow all of the tomatoes from seed. We grow anywhere from 60 to 120 tomatoes a year. And then Dad grows he lives next door to me, but he probably grows another 50 to 60 as well. Those are 75-year-old heirloom tomatoes that my wife's grandpa brought back from Italy. We just keep saving the seeds and replanting them. So it's kind of a neat thing that we've done. I was very frustrated, specifically in the food plot space. When I started reading, so I'm a pretty detail-oriented person, I started reading a lot of the books and things about food plots, and I felt like a lot of stuff was regurgitated, and there was a lot of wives' tales out there, at least in my opinion, that, you can't plant grains and brassicas, for example. But then I read all these cattle studies on regenerative agriculture or mob grazing, and they're doing it, and they're having tremendous success. And you're not robbing the nutrients from one or the other. So how is that? Both can't be true, right? So let's figure out how we can make these things happen. And a lot of that is driven from what I would say is a desire to sell a particular product versus to sell the best solution for the grower. And that's really what we wanted to do. So obviously, as the business has grown, we did start very heavily focused on food plot company. But we've now worked with lawns all the way through. I just did a conference actually for a flower farm right here out of Marietta, Ohio. It was called the Dirt Conference, and they had 1,000 flower farmers from all over the United States that tuned in and wanted to learn how do I make my soil better using cover crops. I never in a million years would have thought we'd been talking to people growing dahlias, but that's where it's taken us, and we're just running with it all the way to a suburban lawn for people who want to reduce runoff, phosphorus, and nitrogen pollution. How can I make my lawn healthy, use less herbicide, and also grow a really healthy lawn? So what we came up with at Vitalize, I'm not going to go through too much on this slide, but we came up with the 1-2 system. So nitro boost and carbon load, the next slide I'm going to talk to you all about is understanding carbon and nitrogen ratios. So you can see these are really diverse mixes. One thing we never wanted to do was overload, or carbon load as we call it, with grains. So I'll tell you that mix right there is 55% grains. The reason that's important is because you have 4.5 pounds of brassica seed in an acre bag of that mix. So you have to keep your ratios accurate. A lot of times seed companies, it's not saying it's right, wrong, or different, but a lot of times they're going to sell you a mix and you're going to look at it and they're going to say you need to seed at 90, 100, 150 pounds to the acre. That's because it's probably 90% oats or something that's going to winter kill pretty quickly. So the price per acre might be lower, but you're getting a lot of pretty inexpensive seed. So what we wanted to do was make sure that you were getting, like I was helping you. I started this out of passion, and I'm never going to sell anything I won't plant on my own farm. So I plant around 30 acres between these two a year. My buddy Greg helps me quite a bit with that. And we use the best annual, so these are both annual mixes, but one follows the other. As you see here, the Nitro Boost has a lot of legumes, so it can fix atmospheric nitrogen. But the other component of that, the nitrogen plant, is they tend to break down faster. So I'll give you a couple examples of understanding carbon to nitrogen ratios. When you terminate Nitro Boost or drill through it or plant through it or lightly till it, and then you plant your carbon load, because they're breaking down faster, you're getting all of those nutrients that were sequestered either in the nutrient profile, right, or in the soil profile, or actually from the air, which is primarily nitrogen, right? There's a lot of nitrogen in here that's going to be fixed. So we're able to heavily reduce our need for synthetic inputs by using biology and cycling those nutrients. But we need to understand what a carbon to nitrogen ratio is. Show of hands quick. Does anybody understand, is anybody familiar with carbon to nitrogen ratios? A little bit? So the best examples I can give you, and you hear this a lot in row crop farming, especially if somebody's like, man, I planted a cover crop, dang cover crops won't work around here. Right? Any NRCS guy can probably tell you they've heard that a million times throughout the United States. And the reason that is one seeding rate. A lot of times, the first thing people do with cover crops and row crop farming situations is they go to rye grain. They go rye grain and they go way heavy. And then they come back and even with soybeans, the next year they go, those soybeans are stunted, I wasn't able to get the growth out of it. Well, really what's happening there is that rye's not breaking down fast enough. It's really full of lignin, and it's a high carbon to nitrogen ratio plant. If you have that mix, if you cut down that rye grain, instead of doing 100 pounds to the acre, and let's say you go in there and you do 40 pounds to the acre with hairy veg, and then plant soybeans into that, you're going to have much better success because you're going to have thatch cover, but you're not going to have this heavy nutrient tie-up, right? So that happens a lot. And that's why you also will see in heavy corn stands fall nitrogen application. No farmer wants to waste money on nitrogen. People go, why are they putting nitrogen down in the fall? They don't even have a cover crop. The reason they're putting that nitrogen down is they're getting those microbes ready that are in the soil to cycle that corn. So when they come back in the next year, if it's corn on corn rotation or corn on bean rotation, they're not fighting through as much thatch, which is the corn stalks, high carbon and nitrogen. A good way to think of this, I give two examples anytime I get asked about this, is if you raked all the leaves in your yard, put them in a corner and did nothing else, and just left them there, I think we could all visualize that that pile of leaves is going to be there for a while. But if your wife all of a sudden says, hey, there's an orange peel and there's a banana peel, throw the green grass clippings and keep putting them on that pile. Maybe you can take a pitchfork and turn it once in a while. All of a sudden, we can all visualize what's going to happen to that pile. Because we've diversified the carbon and nitrogen items that are going in there, it's going to start turning to soil. And that's how compost is made. This is the same idea with the 1-2 system. And this is another good example is clover. So clover is inherently is a low carbon and nitrogen legume. If I had a field of clover here and I sprayed it with glyphosate because I wanted to kill it off and go to brassicas, let's say, every one of us in here would say, in a week I came back and it looked like just bare dirt. But if I had a cornfield here and I sprayed it with glyphosate and came back in a week, what would we all expect to see? Probably a whole lot of corn stalks still, right? That's a perfect example of carbon and nitrogen ratio because the bacteria can break down, the microbes can break down that clover rapidly, and that's why there's nothing left. So it's about balance. You don't want to have nothing because your microbes are going to look for a carbon source. And what's the next carbon source after if all your thatch is gone? It's going to be your organic matter. You can literally mine your organic matter out of your soil if you don't pay attention. You over-apply nitrogen, you overkill products. Those microbes are starving for that balance of carbon and nitrogen, and they can go after that. So why do soil recommendations tend to fail? You can see me there using a soil probe. If you look close, you'll see my phone on the ground there. I'm going to talk about what I do. I use Onyx, but you can use other mapping software. So some of the core problems, this is going to talk a little bit more about gear, but a lot of this is homogeneous throughout anything you're trying to do. Soils vary a lot, right? So tends to be a lot of people who say, oh, my farm's in Noble County, Ohio, or it's in Western Ohio, or it's in Southern West Virginia. Our soils are heavy. And that's kind of where it stops, right? Well, just on my property, I know my soils vary from one field to the next. And without testing it, there's really not a strong piece of data there. So that's number one. A lot of times, single composite samples are sold to be a good fix. I think that after years and years of doing that, just going out with a shovel and taking random spots, and the next year doing the same thing, you'll notice a ton of variability. And there's things on that particular soil that are going to change, and you're not going to realize, well, was that something I did, or was that the sample, right? Because the lab's only as good as the data or the sample we provide. So going around with a shovel at random is not nearly as consistent as a soil probe. The soil probe you can see here, you're going to get, I'm going to have this soil probe marked. Every time I stick that probe in the ground, I get 6-inch depth, and I get the same diameter every single time. Now, the reason I have my phone in this picture is because I have GPS coordinates marked in every single field I go to. So let's say it's a 1 acre food plot. I got 4 GPS coordinates marked that just visually seem to represent what the field is producing. There's no anomalies. You don't want, if you see a low spot or a wet spot, kind of take that out. I go around each one of those spots, I'll take 4 samples around that GPS coordinate. So I literally walk with my phone until it shows that I'm right on there, and then I'll take 4 samples. And with that, you will see consistent, if you're using a probe especially, and if you're trying to do the same time of year, you will see consistent CEC, organic matter trends. You might see some variability, which is totally normal, but you should not see your CEC go from 10 to 30 back down to 10. And I see that so often because we look at a lot of soil tests at Vitalize Seed. Deer hunters, don't feel called out because I was one of these for many times, and I still sometimes get too lazy to do it. But we don't measure browse. So we don't put up exclusion fences and say, did this field fail because it's been dry for the last 3 years in West Virginia and Ohio, or did it fail because there's too many deer relative to the landscape? So that's a big, big issue. I tell everybody, I say, whether you're using my system or somebody else's system, you will not be upset about putting an exclusion fence up. Blanket applications, we're going to talk about that. No-till has taken over. A lot of people are loving no-till. There's some great things about no-till. I do all no-till on my farm. However, there's some issues with no-till. I'm going to get into some specifics there also, specifically with blanket applications. Example, you buy a bag of seed, you look on the back, it says, do 200 pounds of triple 13 per acre, you're going to be set. It's not a great thing from an agronomy perspective. It's also not a great thing for the environment either, because it's a high risk of pollution and things like that. So again, the trying to do it all at once, nobody likes to be patient, I don't either, but trying to get everything done at one time in a single application, single year, can be very tough. So as I mentioned, soil sampling, 1 to 3 acre grids is what I recommend. If you have, say, a 3 acre field and you do it the first year, it's pretty similar from one to the next, then I'm okay jumping up, especially if it's for deer and not row crop, you're not paying your mortgage with it. Then go and do 3 acres, but just use the GPS coordinates. Again, I think you'll be really happy. Some people have even used T-posts. They go, well, I'll put a T-post every 20 yards and I can use it to shoot from my stand also, and that's where I'm going to pull those soil tests every year. So guys come up with all sorts of different ways, but that's another option. I like the GPS, but if you don't have that option, you don't have to. The depth is important in a lab. So I know you all have a lab here. If that's the one you're using, I recommend sticking with the same lab. There's just obviously calibration. There's always going to be some variability. So find a lab you like and stick with that lab. I actually did a test one time. I took 3 probes next to each other. I mean, they were touching. Instead of the 3 different labs, I got 3 different results. Not huge, but slightly different results. I mean, from organic matter to everything. And that goes down to the calibration of the lab and how they kind of do things. So I like to stick with the lab that you like. All right, let's get into reading a soil test. So I don't know how well you all can see this, but let's review a soil test. Starting point. Hopefully this isn't too boring for you all. You're still going to be with me here. I'm going to get through it as quickly as I can. But let's just look at the pasture. So I'm just highlighting things that I look at when I'm looking at a soil test. So let's say this pasture's year one, we want to turn this into a deer fruit plot. Most people, when they first get a soil test, they're going to, oh, where's my pot? How much fertilizer do I need? That's the first thing they want to look at. First thing I like to look at is what's my pH? What are my saturations? Saturations are pretty critical, and a lot of times labs don't give you that. And we're going to explain why saturations on your soil quality are pretty important. CEC. That means cation exchange capacity. A quick rule of thumb, if it's below 10, it's a lighter soil. If it's above 10, it's a heavier soil. I had a really good friend of mine, he's a consultant on about 20 to 30,000 acres in the southeastern United States. He said, think of CEC as a parking garage. The higher the number, the more spots you can park nutrients. The lower the number, the less spots you have to park nutrients. Now, what happens a lot is people want to categorize that as good or bad. There is no good or bad. It's just different management strategies. He's growing corn in southeast Georgia in Daytona beach sand. Like, I'm going to be ready to put my beach towel out that would rival Midwestern corn yields. Well, how is it doing? It's because they're managing the fertility in a very specific and practical way. They're not just saying, well, we got low CEC, we can't grow it. So when I interpret it, again, I look at pH and base saturations. That's the first thing I do. CEC, the holding capacity of that soil. What type of soil are we working with, right? And what is that grower going to do? Is he, somebody says, hey, I got a tiller, I want to till, but he has a real light soil. Well, we might want to say, you know what? You're going to have to be a little bit more careful with the depth of your tillage. You can till, but let's maybe try to do conservation tillage, right? Because you have a lighter soil. Maybe it's really heavy soil. And you go, well, tilling is not going to be the end of the world for you. You kind of have a brick factory anyways. So let's figure out some other things to do to open up that process on the chemical side. We'll get into that. Organic matter and biology. So organic matter on that last test, you'll see, and I'll show it again, was about 5.5. That's great. That's really good organic matter, especially relative to a lighter soil. Organic matter can be split in two portions, the liable fraction and the humus fraction. Really, all you have to think about is there's a portion of that organic matter that's super stable. It's going to have water holding capacity, things like that. The other portion is meant to be cycled. It is like fertilizer. It is meant to feed your crops. But you have to do things to enhance that microbial cycling or nutrient cycling, not slow it down. The nutrients, again, in context, that's the last thing I look at, is how many pounds of triple 13 I need to put in. So why does pH matter? So pH is really over-talked about, and the reason I think it's over-talked about is because it's not explained well enough. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this chart before, but really what this is showing you is, yes, if we get, so I manage a small blueberry patch, about 70 blueberries. And it's kind of become a passion project, anyhow. It's kind of a love-hate relationship. But a lot of times when you want blueberries, people will immediately tell you, oh, well, you just want a low pH. Because blueberries have a high demand for a lot of your micronutrients. But having a low pH doesn't tell me where my level of micronutrients are. It just tells you that in a water solution, how available those particular micronutrients will be at that relative pH. So you could have a pH of 6.5 or 6.8 because I want to grow alfalfa. And I go, oh, my pH is good. That's why like the pH readers, you get it off Amazon, you just shake it up and it tells you, all it tells you is your pH. But you don't have any idea of what other nutrients are there or not there, in some cases, which is more important. So for deer plots, maybe not as critical, but certainly for your garden, your lawn, or, I don't know, I want the best deer plots I can have too, but pH is only a measure of what's available, assuming it's there. So it's important, but it's really just a stepping stone. This is probably my favorite topic to talk about, so I'm already kind of passionate, you might be able to tell, but this is probably going to step it up a bit. I learned this a lot from Neil Kinsey's book, but there's several people who talk about base saturations. If you're not familiar with it, I made this diagram to explain base saturations. So if you look at calcium as an ion, calcium is like a basketball in size. Magnesium is like a marble. So what happens a lot is people look at that other slide and they go, I got to get my pH up. And they go to the Tractor Supply or the Rural King or the Fleet Farm, whatever's near them, and they go, give me all the lime you got. I need a lot. And they don't look at the type of lime, they put down a whole bunch of dolomite lime, but it's on a field that is a high CEC, and the dolomite lime will overpower the calcium in the soil. So instead of between these soil layers, so in between those basketballs, that's like a layer of soil at a microscopic level, right? So instead of you having good porosity, you get a perfect pH in a soil that's way more prone to compaction because you have too much magnesium and not enough calcium in that soil. So what do a lot of people say? Man, I put gypsum down, it's beautiful, it's the best thing ever. Again, those blanket statements don't work though, because I've worked with guys in Northwest Michigan. They have a light soil, they don't have nearly enough magnesium in there, and here they're putting gypsum down because somebody said gypsum's what you need, it makes everything sweet, makes everything great. Their soil's the opposite. They need more magnesium, they need more dolomite lime, because they need to get the chemical side of their structure tighter. This in conjunction with pH, that alone, if you said, in 3 years I'm going to focus on this, your soils will look much better, the water will infiltrate better, and then you add diverse cover crop systems to have the biology part of it pick up, you're really in a strong position to take advantage of some of the dry years we've had, because your water infiltration is going to be better. So, real quickly, there's a lot in the food plot space on quick fixes. Liquid lime, things like that. Number one, this is a little bit of general advice, but if a lime does not have a carbonate element, so see the CO3 up there, the high cal lime, that's your carbonate. If you do not have a carbonate element, you are not removing H, which is your hydrogen. If you're not removing H, you are not changing the pH of that soil for any duration of time. So, high calcium lime is calcium carbonate. What happens when you put calcium carbonate down, the calcium gets on your soil, helps the porosity. The carbonate is now free flowing in your soil solution. What else is in the soil solution? Water. So it forms with water, and you get H2O and CO2 as your off. If you put down dolomite lime, it's the same thing. So you have calcium, magnesium, and the carbonate element. It disassociates in the solution, and then you end up having water and CO2. Not the worst thing in the world. You get your soil colloid or chemical structure fixed. If you put down gypsum, you don't get any impact on pH. You get calcium, which is great. So I have fields that are 6.8 pH, but my calcium is still too low. So I'll get the calcium and sulfur. That's great. Sulfur is important for nitrogen to sulfur ratio for protein synthesis in the plant. That's a good thing. But you don't want to just rely on one of these. So on the liquid lines, a lot of them are calcium chloride. If it is a calcium carbonate product, I'm not against them. But just realize it's a volume game. There is no silver bullet on this because you just simply only put 2 pounds of active ingredient down. There's no biological stimulation. There's no microbial stimulation from a calcium chloride product. If there is, it's very minimal. So keep that in mind. If the liquid lime is a calcium carbonate and it doesn't jam your sprayer, that's another big issue with a lot of the calcium carbonate products. It's only a small amount. So if you're going to do it, that's okay. But I would still follow up with either a Vitalize or mag lime if you can get a buggy in there and things like that, because it's going to be a short fix and then you'll have that slower release product working. So if I have this field again, as I mentioned, year one, what would my focus be? Well, I want to raise this pH, certainly. The saturations are 28.7 and your potassium is low. I'm going to use dolomite lime here because my CEC is light. So now, instead of just, I'm going to fix the pH, but not knowing how or why, and then later having to chase this, with dolomite lime, I kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I get my pH up, and I get my saturations of calcium and magnesium there. Eventually, I'm going to get this pH to a perfect situation, and I'll probably have to add gypsum in a couple of years to just balance that out and maybe add a little bit more porosity, but we'll have to kind of see how it weathers in and things like that. Organic matter, again, 5.3%, that's fantastic. I wish a lot of my fields had 5.3%. I would be focusing on how am I going to cycle those nutrients. So why do blanket fertility systems right now, in no-till specifically, So, does anybody know the term surface stratification? So all it means, it's a really fancy term to basically mean the nutrients are sitting on top. That's it. But it happens a lot. So what happens is a lot of times when going by 13, your synthetic fertilizers are made up of salts. Now a lot of times salt gets confused. My buddy Greg's he's like this because I've picked his brain for years on this. But salt, most of us just think of sodium chloride, table salt. But a salt, by chemical definition, or in soil chemistry, is an ionic compound formed from the reaction of an acid and a base that dissociates in water. So there's a lot more salts in fertilizers than we realize, defined salts. And I'm going to give you a list of them, just and some of them are going to really resonate, I'm sure, with you all. But salt stress can create what's called osmotic stress. And what that is in layman's terms is instead of the roots pulling water up into the plant, because the salt is just like you dry something out with salt, it's pulling the water. It's creating osmotic stress. So you think, I'm just going to hammer this field with fertilizer. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Not only do you put stress on the plants in many cases, and I'm not against fertilizer, I just want to be very clear, but I think the problem is not understanding time and placement. And that's really why I want to get into the nitty-gritty here. Because if you just put it down, not only can you have the salt stress, as mentioned, the plant itself. So plants, as they're growing, as they're photosynthesizing, just like a solar panel connected to a battery, pumps charge into that battery. When that plant's photosynthesizing, it's pumping its charge into the soil. And it's feeding microbes. It's pumping carbon into the soil. And that's why you get nice dark soil. That's why you get microbial biomass increase. If you don't have that, because you're force feeding the plants too frequently, you actually will reduce the amount of excellence. And this has been proven. You know what also reduces it? Is overbrowse. So there's a big movement now in the cattle industry for rotational grazing. And the reason is they went out and studied and said, oh, this pasture has been here for 50 years. And you would think it's good. I mean, the cows have been out there, they're defecating, they're doing their thing. Why is this pasture so rough? Well, the cows went to the sill. Those nutrients that came out of the ground, year one, they were probably really good. Year two, it just went on a steady decline. There was never anything put back. And eventually, you just hit your ceiling, right? You hit your limit. So that's something that also happens is when it's overgrazed, the plants themselves will reduce photosynthetic capture, will reduce root exudation. Obviously, erosion is another one. If you're just throwing fertilizer on top, nitrogen moves fast. So synthetic fertilizer, 13, a lot of times they're urea-based nitrogen, it's ready to go. Phosphorus, in 90% of soils, maybe higher. The best estimation, I think, was from Penn State University. They did a study, their agricultural department. They said, maybe about an eighth to a quarter inch a year, surface applied phosphorus moves. It's going to take a while to get down into your root zone. Potassium, it kind of depends on your soil type, rainfall, things like that. It's either going to move really fast or it's not going to move very much. So, again, some common salt fertilizers, I'm sure you all have heard of these. Ammonium sulfate, MAP, DAP, MOP, SOP. Gypsum is a mine product. So is MOP and SOP. And then calcium nitrate. So most of these fertilizer are industrial manufactured salt post-World War II. Some are still mined, and you can get some mined products. I don't know the regulatory mark on them. You can get them marked as organic. I'm not sure what the parameters are, I should say. But some are mined. But again, we still would want to know on some of these products, how are they going to move in our particular soils based on that soil test. Okay, so a side-by-side comparison, it doesn't show up as good as I wish it would have here, but we're going to talk about something I did. These two probes were taken about 3 meters Brandon apart from each other. So one is a non-managed, just fescue patch. Area A is a managed patch. Oh, and real quick, I wanted to touch on this. So, how do these move in the soil, just in general? So, how do all of these different ions move? So, you see the charge here, and you see very high, moderately high, moderate, low. So, again, if we're applying all of these at once, in one go, the same methodology, You simply can't get the maximum efficiency out of it. There's just no simple way. So you go out there and spray, calcium chloride. Oh, it must have changed the pH. I got a great response. Or maybe you just have super low calcium saturation and your plants were starving for calcium. Similarly, they go, I put down this blend of it. It's everything in one. It's great. And I got a great response. Well, maybe it did because your plant's needing nitrogen. But some of the other stuff, you're going to have heavy nutrient stratification. So you're just, not only is it not good for the environment, but you're probably, in most cases, not getting your money's worth. And I think we all work hard for our money.
Hey guys, Al here, Vitalize Seed. I want to talk to you about what's new for 2026. 2026, we have changed so much. Our soil tests, you can buy them from us. You immediately get a form that you can download and print, and then it will walk you through how to sample. That way you don't have to wait for other sample bags or anything like that. All you'll need is a Ziploc bag and access to a printer for your sample sheet. We added a rewards program, so take advantage of that, guys. Make sure you sign up for your rewards program, just like an airline program or something like that, where you get rewards. You can then use those later. So obviously we want to give thanks to those who are loyal to us. Another thing that we added was a new Alfalfa Edge product, which is an alfalfa-based product. We're doing a lot of that for frost seeding. We have extended our bundle packaging to lawn care, garden, granular fertility, foliar fertility. We do have our entire foliar stack, granular stack, etc. Again, all natural organic products. If you guys like this stuff, check us out at vitalizeseed.com and let us help you get the most out of your food plots, gardens, and lawn care.
So here's the comparison I did. As you can see, I took those samples, those probes, and I split them into 3 sections. They're about 2-inch sections. I sent them off to the lab, and I said, okay, I want you to run 6 soil tests for me. And I want you to run top, mid, lower, and I want you to do the top, mid, lower again on area B. And I highlighted this here just to show you where I was using cover crops and organic nutrients versus just your fescue. And you can see, not only, of course, you would assume that where you're putting down organic nutrients and have cover crops that are fixing nitrogens, that you're going to have higher nutrient values. I didn't expect it to be this high for me to brand it apart from each other. This much of a difference. And also how it's moving down through the soil. So my phosphorus example, there's only 26 pounds per acre in the top 2 inches. On the managed one, we have 104. But even what's more interesting is 6 inches down, using organic nutrients, I have 22 pounds of phosphorus from using organic nutrients and cover crops at 6-inch depth. That's almost higher than the fescue lawn in the top soil, essentially. So we are moving the most immobile nutrient through organic applications in cover crops. And the reason organic matters is because when you put down organic nutrients and you use cover crops, even if you put down synthetic nutrients and use cover crops, they're going to take those things up, and then that crop is going to die when you terminate it, or naturally. And when that crop dies, worms don't eat, I mean, they do eat a little bit of rock, but for talking purposes, worms don't eat rock and moving, but they do eat dead ryegrass, dead turnips, dead radish, so do microbes. And what do those do? Well, we got our base saturations fixed. Now we have good root structure because we're using diversity, and now those are all moving down through the soil profile. And they're defecating, the microbes are dying. So that's how you're naturally moving from nutrient stratification and your dollar bill sitting at the top down into the soil profile. And I'll give you one example of this. So there's a famous farmer, I think his name is Melvin Kramer out of Southern Illinois. A famous no-tiller since late 1970s. Sure he took a lot of slack from him back then, but he's been doing no-till for a long time. And what he ended up doing is he gave me the idea to try this. Because he did what he always did. He cut his corn, the co-op came out and they broadcast P&K after his corn. He did that for 15 years on this field because I'm just not getting the yields that I want to get out of this corn. So we took those samples like I just showed you there and sent them to the lab in sections. Over 15 years, it was something like 80% of his P&K was still in the top 2 inches of the soil. If he's planting his corn at 2x2, most of the time the roots are below where all that phosphorus was. So what did he do? He took a moldboard plow, he flipped it over, went right back into no-till, and then next year, he broke his yield record on that particular field. Because he was able to then, in that case, he physically moved it. Had he been using cover crops for years and years, and that study got a little bit misinterpreted because he did a big presentation at the no-tillers conference, and people said, oh, look, no-till's not perfect. Well, one, it isn't. But two, cover crops would really help that nutrient stratification because of the things we just talked about. So some of the other things that I'll show here, what does that data show? So area A, the topsoil held 104 pounds of phosphorus versus 26, 300% more. I was holding there. And then it goes down. I won't read all of this, but as you can see, the zinc was 550% higher at the top and nearly 900% higher at the bottom. So we're moving nutrients naturally through that soil profile to drive yield. And in some cases, where nutrients are lower, that also can be a good thing because in soils, you have antagonisms are always occurring. So just like the calcium and the magnesium, right? As one goes up, another one must come down. So they will naturally balance themselves out throughout there. But the big fight in no-till is really that stratification or that separation of nutrients. That is one of the biggest hurdles, in my opinion, talking to growers of all different kinds. If they're committed to no-till, it's getting something down that's actually going to get into the soil without having to physically turn it over. One thing I didn't measure here, so there's a test you can do called the Total Nutrient Digest. It measures everything in the soil. So it talks about geological stores all the way to your biology. But based solely on the soil and the color of it and everything else, I would guarantee you your biological biomass, which they die. And plants will take those up. And there's also a study out there called the Rhizophage cycle, which I won't get into that, but it actually talks about plants taking up microbes themselves. And they're in amino acid form, which means it's a much shorter conversion to plant protein than if it's in an ionic form. That's Dr. James White, the Rhizophage cycle, if anybody's interested in that. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. It's still kind of cutting edge as to exactly how all of that works. So again, this isn't this was just a conventional test, not biological, but I wanted to show you this picture again. I don't know how well you can see it, but if you could, so we looked at the numbers, which I'm a nerd, you probably picked up on that by now, but I enjoy those numbers. But if not, if you just looked at these two, you would immediately be able to see that there is almost topsoil looking color, clear down here to 6 inches. Whereas that is hard clay that looks like I could make a brick out of it if I wanted to. And this works for not just food plots, but gardens, lawn care, etc. I had 2 videos, but I'm not sure. That's okay. So I want to show you guys. We're going to shift a little bit more into deer hunting now, so hopefully I didn't lose anybody. So this is a field I sold 35-year-old red pines on the farm. They were old, they were dying, it was a biological desert. And I knew that if I could get this to be a food plot, it was a perfectly beautiful ridge, that it would set up really nice to hunt. And hopefully, my son's only 4 and a half, and he'll be hunting here with me soon. It's close to the house, all of these things. That was year 1. I think everybody here would say that doesn't look ideal. So we planted our nitro boost in there, and it did okay, but we knew we needed to get some growth, some biomass, convert that field. So after 2 years, this was the second year, coming out of fall. That's that same field, almost the same location. That's that target load, as I mentioned, the annual clovers, the winter wheat, triticale, things like that, hairy veg. I can't even believe that myself, and I took the pictures. And we went from that first picture to that in 2 years without any synthetic. And just take it even a step further. So here's some examples. That is that field in 2 years. You can already see how the roots are going down. They're fighting against compaction. This field is an old logging deck. It's been in this system around 5 years. You can see about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of topsoil being built on an old red pine logging deck. That last one is actually in a garden that I've been working on. Just look at the color and the texture of that soil. So I'll give you another one here because it's one of my favorite pictures. If there ever was a picture that showed what good soil aggregation looks like, it should look like a sponge. It's that picture right there, at least that I've ever taken. So that field was actually cleared with a dozer and has been in this system off and on. I used to till it all the time. I tilled the snot out of it. My uncle used to till it something. I'd take like 4 hours to till this field. I don't know what he was doing. He was a creeper here. But we couldn't even find a worm in that field. That's one shovel. After multiple years of no-till, using organic amendments, foliar sprays, and really letting biology do the work for us. So I do want to touch on some termination methods. Herbicide's a great tool. I use it. I'm not pro, I'm not anti any of these methods. I want them to meet the grower where they're at. But I do want people to understand what each one does and how it functions. Number one issue I see with herbicide, and this can be from, we were blessed this year to work with a farmer in Missouri. I think the cover crop order alone we did with him was over 300 acres. I mean, it was just really for a small business. You know, that was a big deal for us to get to, that he trusted in us. And even he was struggling with some of the chemistry for how to use his herbicides properly to make them most effective. So what we have to understand is high level. You should be using ammonium sulfate. A lot of people go, oh, about my glyphosate at Tractor Supply. It says it already has a surfactant in it. They're totally different things. So keep that in mind. If you are going to use an herbicide, read the label, but understand what you're putting in the tank. Ammonium sulfate dissociates, so it dissolves in water. So if you have well water and you're filling up your spray tank, you probably have calcium and magnesium in there, and they're floating around in that water. And you pour your glyphosate in there, glyphosate is what's called a chelator. What's it going to do? Binds. Calcium is not very mobile. It doesn't want to translocate. So what happens? You spray it, and you don't nearly get the effective kill. You put ammonium sulfate in the water first, what does it do? It disassociates, so it breaks apart. It binds up, that sulfur binds up the calcium and magnesium, so it's no longer free floating in there. So when you add glyphosate or glufosinate to that tank, not only do you have the ammonium, which is going to act as a nitrogen, so the plants can say, oh, I'm getting fed. Let me take this in. Number two, you're not going to have your calcium and magnesium that's actually in the water, or hard water ions is another term people use, binding to your herbicide. And then, if it does have a surfactant is going to reduce surface tension. So what does that mean? It means that instead of having a bubble that just sits there and you've only got one spot on the leaf, that bubble's going to pop. It reduces the water surface tension. So why is that important? Because you get total leaf coverage. That is how we can fight against a lot of these crops. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these crops becoming herbicide resistant is because of inadequate use of herbicides and not understanding that chemistry. So I beg you, if there's anything, if you're going to use herbicide, you will be so much happier. I've been thinking, oh, you can't kill mare's tail. Okay, let's try it. And I'll roast it. But I'm using the right steps. And on the label of glyphosate, I haven't read all of them, but most of them, they will walk you through the steps as well. Anybody can reach out to me as well with questions. I'd be happy to walk you through it. Roller crimpers, that's like a big grave. They're cool. They're very cool. They are not the end all be all. I'll show you. I actually bought one from a guy. I'm not that handy, but he made one. It was a few $100, and I said, you know what? To be able to record this and show people what you can do with one, it's worth the investment. Let's see. And give an honest review, right? It's not an $8,000 one or whatever some of these ones are. But there are USDA studies, and I'll highlight that just so at least if you're interested, you can look out further, that took a perfectly flat ground. This is a controlled study, and they ran roller crimpers, flail mowers next to each other. You get about 80% termination, 85% termination. On multi-species cover crops, the termination is going to drop down. So again, as one thing goes up, the next thing goes down. We want more diversity, but physical termination becomes a little bit more difficult. Flail mowers is actually one of the best for physical termination. There's a farmer named Rick Clark out of Indiana. I think he has the Farm Green podcast, something like that, if anybody's interested. He's been using a flail mower for years. You get really good residue breakdown because it chops it up so well. The other thing I like about flail mowers is you can find a lot of ways to use a flail mower around the farm. You can mow along fences, mow along ponds. A roller crimper, I mean, if you're not roller crimping cover crops, it's pretty much a paperweight. You can tell I don't know any stake in the roller crimper company. The other two are, so for deer cover crops, I've really started to love this idea. So I come into a field and I cut the tractor off and I start walking around and I go, man, this field coming out of fall, so we call it carbon load, but fall cover crop. I go, it's 90% weed free. I'm gonna drop the drill, I'm gonna drill right through it and drive off. And I have yet to regret that decision. It doesn't look as great, but I have a ton of cover and a ton of wildlife food. Now, if I get back in August, or I'm getting ready to plant that fall cover crop again, carbon load as we call it, I just look at it and I go, okay, deer hammered it, whatever happened, right? There's some wind damage, some weed pressure took over, and I use an herbicide to kill it off. But I've reduced my herbicide now to once. In some cases, 12 to 13 months, a field might have herbicide one time. Versus if I planted a monoculture beans or something like that, and I sprayed and drilled and then sprayed 3 more times. So that is something that I've really enjoyed. It is a little bit messier, but it's been a time saver, and deer have mined it all, and deer have the turkeys. And the last one that nobody wants to talk about, because it's like tillage is a bad or dirty word in some circles, and I think it's totally misunderstood, is tillage. If you're going to use cover crop, you can use tillage. I just recommend, in most cases, not going crazy in depth. You can lightly till things to reset them, get your seed down, pack it down, drive off. Go have a cold pop, cold beer, whatever you're interested in. This is the homemade roller gripper. So I just want to show you, again, I'm happy with the results. But like I'm sure a lot of you in this room can relate to, you don't have perfectly flat fields. So anytime there's contour, you're going to reduce pressure. So you might have a whole lot of pressure right here because the roller gripper's like this. So that crop, it's dead as a doornail. The one over here, you're going to hit it twice. It's a time commitment. Just again, some things to think about. I've done a lot of biological tests on fields that have been sprayed with herbicide. I'm not pro herbicide, but I think we have to weigh what's effective, the dollars, the time. I've done a lot of soil biological tests after people told me, oh, herbicide is going to kill all your microbes. It's going to kill all your mycorrhizal fungi. My biological biomass in my field, like I showed you Stonehenge, that had all the worms in it. I use herbicide there. It was off the charts in Ward Laboratories. They say like 5,000 units or something like that. I forget the exact metric they used. They're like, this is off the charts. But I called them. I said, what do you think? They're like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I'm like, well, I've used herbicide. They're like, well, obviously you're not abusing it. So I think that's really the key. I always like to say the poison's in the dose. Keep that in mind. It's a tool in the toolbox, and similarly with tillage. If you're going to do tillage, do it light. Don't recreational till. Don't just go out there to till. This is that USDA study, and then I promise after this we're going to actually talk deer stuff, at least for a little bit. So again, just as you can see, guys, hairy vetch is an awesome cover crop. Some guys hate it if you're doing hay production, but if you're doing cover crop for another crop following it, it's an awesome cover crop. But it can be tough to germinate. And you can see here just that serial ride, the 2-stage mower, the power roll flare mower. Basically, the flare mower essentially dominates on average across the board, especially in the multi-species cover crops. So, last few slides, I promise. Deer management. I want to talk about some things that hopefully you guys find interesting. I know I do. Deer density, browse observation, doe harvest, age, nutrition. Most people, so I don't do on-site consultants, but or consulting, but I talk to quite a few. I have a lot of friends from the ODNR to state foresters to guys who do private consulting. And one of the things I said eventually I'm going to make a t-shirt that says this, but most farms need to shoot more deer, plant more food, than most of them have to do both. And that's just a fact. Most people don't think they have enough deer. And I'm going to show you, I questioned it myself, even after some of these images. So, I don't know how well y'all can see this. That's a beech tree in southeastern Ohio. My forester said, hey, when you do this mid-story removal, Al, you need to treat every beech stump because it's a non-browsable species and deer shouldn't be eating beech in this geographical region. You get upstate New York, high altitude or in Pennsylvania, things like that, it's more of a browsable species. But not in this region. That looks like a bonsai plant. They're eating the snot out. And again, that's with 30 acres of food plots planted every year, not counting clovers and chicories and things like that I put hard to get, where I can't get the track ready. And that's what that looks like. Look at the maple stump sprouts being kept basically at a year's level. Not just year 1, but year 2, year 3. That's a clover chicory plot. All clover can hit a whole lot of grounds. This is adjacent to about a 2.5 acre, 2.25 acre field of our highly diverse fall mix. And that's what that clover plot looks like. But I still, even after that, and even being the nerd that I am and reading all these books and talking to people who are a whole lot smarter than me in forestry and things like that, I just don't know if we have that many deer. We'll shoot a couple, but I just don't know if we have that many deer. So we kept doing TSI. This is just an example of what we're doing to open up. We did about, in one bottom alone, not counting edge feathering that we do just without NRCS contracts, but just one bottom alone, we did about 24 acres. In almost all of it, I couldn't even find a beech that resprouted. Most of them were dead just from the deer browse. Obviously, that one must have had a strong root system; it was still going. Another one was beech nut hickory. So tons of hickory. They said, "Oh, hey, deer eating hickory in this part of the world, you're in trouble." I like hold my beer page because here it is, and they're eating like crazy. So our goal on our farm, and I'm sure a lot of you all can relate, at least if you're deer guys, is you want to maximize food. And so I would maximize in my summer blends. This is not my farm. I could never get this to grow. I can, unless it's in a cage. But this is a gentleman who planted this for me. Well, actually, he works for the ODNR. He's in northwestern Ohio. So much lower deer density, really good quality deer, a much lower deer density. And he planted this here in a field. It's not fenced or anything like that, just lower deer density. And that's actually our nitrogen planting. But you can imagine how much photosynthetic energy capture. That is like a solar panel from gathering sunlight and pumping into the ground. Now this is my farm actually, or at least one or two of these pictures are. I just want to show you. This is just one little field on the farm. I mean, we're planting a lot of food, and yet we're still seeing the deer absolutely hammer to the point where I showed you in those other images, the browse, how much is getting taken off the field. The thing about deer, they're not a grazer like a cow that's going to sit there and eat and then just defecate in the same spot. They eat a little bit and they run off. So you're fertilizing an oak tree or an autumn olive in my case, stuff that I'm trying to kill, and I'm over here fertilizing with deer going over there. So again, if you've made it this far, you probably realize this dude is nerdy and likes data. And I decided that I was going to hire one of these drone operators. So I'm not sure if it's legal in the state of West Virginia, but it's legal in Ohio, at least, I guess all year for deer recovery and for drone surveys. But that wasn't going to be enough for me because I'm like, all right, I got 400 acres here. I got 10 to 20 cameras out. I'm going to put some bait out. It's legal in Ohio. And I'm not going to hunt or anything. I'm just going to monitor these cameras for 17 nights from 4 to 6 p.m. That's about the most active window, right? And I'm going to count every night how many antlerless deer, and I'm going to count bucks. But mostly I was looking for what's the density. So I was really just trying to count generalized deer. The average was about 14.5 antlerless deer a night that I'd see on all 400 acres. It doesn't seem that many. I mean, I know in some ag areas, you see big 30 acres field, you see 50 over in a field, right? Like, geez, that didn't seem like that. But I knew there would be a lot of other people, again, way smarter than me, had done studies and said cameras only capture about 50% of what you put out, of what is out there. So after I took that number, I said, well, let's just about double it. So I then hired a drone. And what the drone found on that 400 acres, so I think the total number I came up with was like about 55 total deer. What the drone found on 400 acres was 71 antlerless deer and 14 bucks, which puts your deer density at about 136 deer per square mile. Now, Anybody knows this, that if you're looking to do this at scale, like a state would, you'd want to fly multiple square miles, not just 400 acres. But I do think it puts it into perspective. I think I'm a relatively detail-oriented guy. I put a hunter observation, I took camera survey data, I talked to neighbors, and we had shot 6 does, by the way, before this had occurred. And that's still the number of deer that we had. And what stuck out to me the most is that field I showed you that looked like a big rolling pipeline. It's one of the most active fields on the planet. You get tons of deer coming out of these little thickets. There's about 15 to 30 acres that butts up next to that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there watching 3 or 4 does come out. And then I look at my phone, text my wife, whatever, look at a picture of my kids. I look back up and go, oh, those 3 does are back. What the drone showed me is that in that little 15 to 30 acre, I didn't measure it, bottom, there was 19 does. But they weren't in a line like you might have in an agricultural setting. There was 3 to 4 does here. 60 yards up, with just a little change in the contour, you had 3 or 4 more does. A little bit further down, you had 3 or 4 more does. Now, I'm not saying everybody needs to shoot does, but I think with this new technology that we have to really understand what deer densities are, you might not always see 15 deer at a cornfield or in a food plot. But if you stack all of these different things together, like I showed you the browse, the food plots, the measurements there, and then trail cameras, neighbor, then you might just say, okay, now let's take some mouse off the landscape. Because in order to hit the genetic potential of these whitetail bucks that we all, mostly I would say, want to kill bigger bucks. I mean, Dr. Bronson Strickland, Dr. Steve Damaris are 2 guys out of Mississippi Deer Lab. They wrote a book called Strategic Harvest Systems. It's well worth the read if you're interested in it. I highly recommend it. And it essentially talks about there's only so much high quality food. You know, you can't just stock a cattle lot with 1,000 head. Well, why not? They'd starve. Deer are no different. There's only so much high quality food. So when you start to see your native browse declining, your food plots declining, getting overbrowsed, hunter observation is not enough because there's too many things that go into it. A coyote could have ran through there, a bobcat, another hunter could be downwind of you depending on the size of your property. Who knows what could have happened that could have reduced 1 or 2 nights of staying. So through this, we've had quite a bit of success. We actually, my buddy Brian just got this jawbone back, so we send every jaw to Deer Age to do some cementum annuli on it. It's the most accurate way to age whitetail. But we had a 7.5-year-old, 4.5-year-old, and a 5.5-year-old off our little slice of heaven in the last 3 years. So by shooting those, keeping pressure down, managing food plots, I haven't spent money on synthetic fertilizer in 15 years, just using biology to cycle nutrients. To us, we've had a hell of a lot of success. I also have my son up there, Bryce. He doesn't have a choice. That's my cousin Zach, and he shot a nice buck there. My son got to come recover with us, and then this picture here, my cousin, my uncle, my good buddy Brian, and my buddy right here who's with me today, and that was Brian's buck this year with 233 pounds gutted. So it was an impressive whitetail. And that's me, president and founder of Vitalize Seed, but more importantly, I'm just Albert. I'm just a regular guy who's passionate, and I appreciate you all listening to me tonight. Thank you, guys.
So real quick, put a plug in. I'll talk a whole lot about soil testing and getting that right, and you're like, that's great, but that's way too technical, or I don't have time to do that. There are 3 gentlemen that are also part of a partner agency called the Little Canal Conservation District. They actually offer a soil testing service. They have a person in their office that can come out, pull your soil samples. They'll send them off for you. You get the results back, and then you're like, well, this is great, but what the heck does this mean? If you bring those in the office, we can sit down with you and go over them and say, hey, this is what this is telling you. So yeah, a lot of that stuff looks like Greek, but there's resources out there to help you interpret what that's telling you.
I totally echo that. I mean, there's so many great resources. I tell people, we use board labs. There's so many good labs. And you got to rely on somebody who's willing to take the time and just talk you through it. Because there's a lot of people who, oh yeah, I'll do a soil test for you. You know, but they want to sell you something. They want to sell you something in a jug, right? There's no fast fixes. Use those resources because I'm sure you guys would be really happy. It's like I tell people all the time. My forester goes, and you come to me with questions, I go, you're the expert. You know, I don't know everything there is to know about forestry. I don't even know half of what you know. So I'm like, yes. So I think that's really critical is find somebody in those categories that you're interested in who is that expert and may not. And then once you find it, stick with it because your results will be more consistent. So again, I really appreciate you guys. I could talk about this stuff for a couple days, but I think you guys probably want to call it. But thank you very much. I will answer any questions if anybody has any. That's either really good or really bad. I'm not sure.
But if you don't have roller crimpers, if you don't have a flail mower per se, if you're talking about quarter acre, half acre food plots that are kind of bad terrain, maybe bad soil, what is the best way to, if you go nitro boost into the carbon load, to terminate that? Do you just seed right into it and leave it? Or should you run brush hog over it? Should you run a roller over it?
Yeah, so it's really up to you. So we have people do all the above. Greg and I were on this farm today. Actually, he did a nitro boost and carbon load planting simultaneously right past Father's Day. So he had kind of the benefits of both worlds. He had sorghum heads. Unfortunately, his farm got hit pretty bad with EHD there on the other side of the river, but so the browse wasn't overly noticeable. But then there's turnips all below. So some people do that. Some people use herbicide. They just terminate the nitro boost and then seed into it, or seed into it and then mow it off after, give it like a day, because you do need to let the herbicide get into the plant itself. Some people will do it like this. I mean, it really is up to you. Some people will roll it. It's really dependent on your goals and what you see as a success. Deer are going to eat it. And the other thing is, by having that little exclusion fence, even on a small field, then you can come back and go, man, I was money on my seed rate. I was at 45 pounds. That's perfect. But like seed rates and things, that's just a blanket suggestion. And we do it too. We're like, yeah, 45 pounds the acre drill. And that works for a lot of farms. On my particular farm, I have to bump that up because of just pure deer density. Right? So if you have a poor quality, you might want to seed a little bit heavier. But most commonly, to your question, people seed and mow, seed and roll, spray, let it dry, seed, roll or mow, in most cases.
I'll add a little of that. Be careful with perennial grasses in that scenario, because right about the same time you're going to drill that nitro boost or spring summer planting into that overwintered fall crop is about the same time as your warm season grasses are coming out of dormancy. And if you go in and mow that off, sometimes I've had experience trying that with no herbicide. And if that specific plot has warm season grasses in it, you know, orchard grasses, a lot of us convert old hayfields, right? That stuff will just jump out of the ground at that point. It's almost like a mowing that early mid-spring or early summer mowing kind of activates the perennial grasses to just jump out of the ground and can now compete your annual planting.
Yeah, I got a lot of heat on the video I did one time. We were taking up part of my farm, there was a pipeline, it's all orchard, fescue, junk. And I saw the tractor and I said, you're not going to roller your way out of a fescue pasture. Me being dumb, I put it on YouTube. And of course, you get a bunch of like, you're killing the earth. But in reality, I would rather have you just use herbicide correctly and get it killed and then do what you want to do with it than sit there and run your head into the wall because you think you're saving the world with a roller crimper or a bush hog. Like, so if there's not a lot of pressure there, you can mow it. But if you see that one, it's better than just getting slate clean. And that could even be with tillage. But you might bump up your seed rate to outcompete some of those things. You're going to kill it with the tillage, right, or disc it, and then you're going to increase that seed rate. So you have a few different options, but that would be my recommendation there. That was a good point. Yeah, man.
Coming off of an active logging job, so several tracks getting all correct. Working with timber, so you've got to deal with all the acidity, especially in like log painting where you're processing the wood, you've got all the sawdust and everything like that. And even on your skid rows. So me and Scott talked about this quite a bit. And something I want to start implementing with my clients is kind of an after effect planting on the skid roads and on landings and stuff like that. My main concern is obviously that I would think higher on acidity level in soil because of the bark and everything I mentioned. What is a good solution or something to, what would you do essentially in those situations? Because you said you know how to manage that and how to deal with it. Like, is it kind of a year later kind of ordeal? Or,
Well, I think you have to, I mean, first off, you gotta get that soil test,
Right.
understand, because logging, I think it gets a worse rap than it deserves. A lot of people, it causes all of this compaction. Greg and I have talked about this a lot. A lot of logging equipment, because your weight is spread out on a track, you're not getting as much compaction as you would with just running your four-wheeler back and forth when everything's wet. You know, that can cause a lot of compaction. So number one, I would say pulling a soil test can be critical, because there probably is some surface compaction.
Right.
And then depending on what you're looking to plant, like if it's a food plot, like an old log landing, highly diverse mixes are beautiful because some species in that is going to really take off and shine, and others might not do quite as well. But you're going to have some. You go in there with just purple top turnips, you might be really upset, right? But having that soil test would be critical, because then you can decide, hey man, we got a little bit of surface compaction. It's hard to get the probe in. This first year, let's lime and gypsum and work it in, fit the field, pack it down tight, and then go into a no-till system if you're really looking to build. Right. If you're looking at logging roads, it really, again, it depends. I like, on most of mine, I have our clover chicory blend, but that's not perfect for everybody. So in some cases, actually a little bit of ryegrass, which is a dirty word to some people, but from an erosion perspective, it can be a good, fast-growing plant. I would just keep it deer or deer. I would keep it a lower percentage, but use it to help grab that erosion. And you could always go back in and spray the cleft in once your clover gets established and clean that up. You also, when plants are in either a low or high acidity, so especially high, I'll use this as a quick example. So say you want to grow blueberries and you're in Seattle, Washington, your pH is 7.5. It's really expensive. Actually, you can't get that pH down to where you would need to grow blueberries. So how do you do it? There's a ton of blueberry farms out there. They use foliar nutrition. So it's not like you're dead in the water. As I was saying about my buddy in the southeast, he has low soil. It's not like you're dead in the water, but the way in which you're feeding the plants, you're going to spoon feed those plants differently. So it's a little bit nuanced, but hopefully I answered your question.
Do you deal with Japanese silkgrass over in your area?
I hate it.
One thing to add to your question there is manage your expectations a little bit, right? You're starting off with a pretty barren and compact area. It's never going to look like covering North American whitetail magazine food plot in the first year or two, right? It's almost like a flywheel effect. Albert and I have used as an analogy before, right? The system takes a little bit to get going, to get the biology, get all that photosynthetic energy into the soil. It takes a little bit to get that going and build up some momentum, right? So things we do early on, like I said, soil test, make sure your calcium is where it needs to be, right? Because if you're deficient in calcium, dominant in magnesium, and combine that with the mechanical compaction of all that heavy equipment, you can end up with essentially hard paint on the surface, right? So, and then go heavy with your seed rates in the early years, right? Because everything is going to struggle in those early years until the roots are able to penetrate the compact layer. You're able to get your calcium ratios right. You're able to get some biological activity back in the soil.
Yeah, the first couple of years, the biggest radish we found at your place was that. It went through a hornet's nest.
Yeah, perfect.
And I mean, we were pulling them today.
Yeah. Right.
No synthetic input. And they went from like that between a hornet's nest, the biggest radish you had. We have
That's actually when I had the Eureka moment. Compaction was one of my biggest issues. I've since built a pole barn on an adjacent area of the same pasture. And when I was doing the site prep work, I was joking with Albert, I think open a brick factory. It's solid clay. Well, the best radish I grew in the first year I ever planted this happened to be a seed that landed right on the edge of the yellow jacket cluster. And there was a void in the soil underneath and gave it room to actually grow the tuber. And a skunk later in the season dug it out, and that's how I found it, right? And that's when I knew, okay, compaction is my issue.
And how many do you find a day?
Oh, more than you can count. Now, that's also because my deer density is extremely
Well,
high.
but I mean, the compaction side of it, you're even a sorghum, you can about, what is the one you measure, 9 inches?
10 inches deep on the sorghum.
But it took
Earthworms in there everywhere.
4 years. I mean, it's
Yeah.
there is no silver bullet. Any other questions?
No, I would say with y'all's stuff, not really support y'all, but the really big thing is just do the exclusion cage, is where I've done it. And my dad's old timer, and he's in, kind of when I first got this a few years ago, put cages. And you go out there, and I think that's how I was built like, right? It's about 9 acres. It's lit high everywhere. But I had 2 cages up, there's still money. Had a turnip in there all the kids, and I had literally grow up. And my dad's like, he's like, called me, ain't nothing growing, you wasting time. And I'm like, well, have you looked at the cages? No. So I went and showed him, he's like, you're lying. You're telling me this exactly what should be growing here. He said, yeah, we got nah. I said, he's got waste me here. Yeah, which is still a problem, but exclusion cages is huge. You kind of, at least me, I'm just hurting the time all the time. So I put them up everywhere just so I feel better, knowing my hard work didn't go to waste. You know?
Well, I think the other thing too is with those diverse mixes is you probably still see deer out there feeding.
Oh,
If it was just a purple top turnip patch, just what I tell people, once they're gone, that's it. So even in my deer density, like I showed you in some of those cages, it's this. But by spring, eventually the deer have enough to eat. There's greenbrier, smile, all that stuff. And all of a sudden, those plots are coming. If it was just purple top turnips, I'd go in there and I'd be like, oh my gosh. And then you talk about a compaction nightmare, because now there's nothing on mud. So you almost have a constant root growing, and the deer are still feeding you. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know how, because it is so bloody.